It was my first tactile hallucination. It was my first visual hallucination. Hi everyone, my name is Katie and I live with depressive type schizoaffective disorder. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about one of my recurrent hallucinations, the cat. For those of you who don't know, schizoaffective disorder at its most basic level is kind of like a combination of schizophrenia and a mood disorder. So for me, that's depression. So I have all the symptoms of schizophrenia and all of the symptoms of depression. And sometimes they happen together, sometimes they happen separately, and it tends to be episodic for me. The cat is one of my original hallucinations. It was my first tactile hallucination. It was my first visual hallucination. And it is one of the very few positive hallucinations that I've had. For the most part, my symptoms are unsettling, terrifying, unnerving, and just overall very unpleasant. But the cat is a source of comfort. The cat makes me feel like maybe everything is going to be okay. And when I see her, she blinks slowly at me. There's a funny story about that because I didn't know what that meant, but I went to a reading with my favorite author, Mark Z. Danielewski, and he was there with Chris O'Reilly, who they had put together this whole performance where Mark read the book and Chris played piano, and it was a really great performance. And at the time, Mark was writing a book about a girl and a cat, a whole series, and I was so excited, and he was in the middle of it. He was wearing only cat shirts. And so when I went to get my book signed, I was at the peak of my point of like being open about schizoaffective disorder when I had first started talking about it. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I have to tell you, I have this disorder, I have this illness, and one of the things that I see is this cat, and it just blinks slowly at me. And Chris says, that's how cats kiss. That's how they say I love you. And then I went home and I looked it up, and it's true. That is how cats say I love you, is that slow blink. And I didn't know that before, but my brain had still manifested that within the cat, which I attribute to the fact that I've had cats my whole life. And so I've probably recognized cats doing that as a comforting thing, but I didn't know that that's what that meant. And my brain was doing that. The cat is not a spirit. This cat is not a cat that I've ever known in real life. This cat is not guiding me in any way. The cat first came to me as a tactile hallucination. It was right at the beginning, before I had my initial schizophrenia or schizoaffective diagnosis. And I was completely overwhelmed because I was experiencing all of these weird symptoms, these disorganized thoughts, these hallucinations and things, and I didn't know what was happening to me. I had started seeing a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and I had started seeing a therapist, and we were working towards a diagnosis, but we were, I think, at depression with psychotic features at the time. And I was just completely overwhelmed. All of these doctor's visits and medications and therapy visits and, just everything. And so one day I was over at a house where I was pet sitting, and I was just trying to decompress. I was lying on the couch watching TV with the dogs, and I had my arm hanging off the edge of the couch. And I felt a cat sniff the back of my hand, just the breath and the whiskers. And without looking, I reached out to pet it, and I could feel it kind of back away. And we went back and forth like this a few times without me looking before I remembered that they don't have a cat. A few days later, I was crawling under a desk at home to turn off a power strip, and there she was. 2.5 foot high, fluffy gray cat with pale eyes. And she blinked slowly at me. And a part of me felt like maybe everything was going to be okay. And a part of me panicked, and I called my doctor. And it was at this point that my doctor's language started to change. And I first heard the words schizophrenia come from her mouth. Over the years, I've had a few more episodes, and the cat has shown up in each and every episode. In my second episode, the cat showed up towards the end, and I just saw her, and she blinked slowly at me, and I knew that everything was going to be okay. I can't remember if it was that episode or the following one, but I was sitting on the couch at my boyfriend's house, and I had my arm up on the arm of the sofa, and I felt her kneading on my arm. I couldn't see her, and I couldn't feel her on my lap or anything, but I just felt it. And to give you an idea of how detailed tactile hallucinations can be, I could feel every toe articulate as she did it. In the episode that I had in my senior year of college, she showed up frequently, probably every few days. And I kind of thought of her as my personal Cheshire cat. She'd be in a tree, she'd be sitting on a wall, and she always just looked at me calmly, quietly. And I felt like, okay, maybe things will get better. And the fact that I was seeing her so frequently was making it less comforting because I was like, okay, well, are you signifying the end of this or not? Are things actually going to get better? Because they haven't gotten better. But they did in the end. She has shown up in my other episodes as well, though very briefly. This cat is a very hazy, ghostly hallucination. I don't see her as solid as I see my pet cat. But when I see her, I still have the same reaction that I have every time I have a hallucination, which is this like emotional, visceral reaction where my emotions are telling me this is real. But my brain is able to tell me that no, this is a symptom, this isn't real, this isn't possible for a cat like this to exist. I have a level of awareness where I can understand that my symptoms are symptoms. And that's not that uncommon, actually. There's a lot of people who can understand that when they're experiencing symptoms, they're symptoms. But for some people they can, and for some people it kind of comes and goes. But for me, I've pretty typically had this level of what they call insight or awareness. But the cat is kind of a hazy hallucination, and that was something that was hard for me at first. I was under the impression that visual hallucinations were supposed to be as realistic looking as anything else, as you or me. It actually took until college when I read a paper, a scientific paper about hallucinations being hazy for some people, that I finally felt validated, and I felt like, oh, okay, so this is real. This is a real experience. These are really visual hallucinations. It didn't matter that my doctor had been confirming the whole time that these were visual hallucinations. I still just felt like they should have looked different. But the emotional response that I feel is real. So now you know a little bit more about one of my visual and tactile hallucinations and one of the most significant hallucinations that I've had, the cat.